Hello and welcome to episode 212 of Herpetological Highlights, the podcast all about reptile and amphibian science. My name is Tom Major, and co-hosting with me is my main man, Ben Marshall, and we've got a nice episode today about snakes, Ben. We're going to be talking about snakes.
It's a very snake-heavy episode, and that's something that we've never done before.
Yeah. First time for us talking about snakes, and hopefully the listeners are going to love it. Hopefully some of our sort of enthusiasm for snakes can come through in this episode. We do quite like them, and we're going to be talking about, later on in the episode, we got some big news, whopping news from the world of arguably one of the world's most iconic venomous snakes, becoming multiple iconic venomous snakes. That's right.
Yeah, more the merrier, right?
New species of king cobra being described. And we've prior to that, we've got some stuff about vipers here. So this is a paper by Van Zele, Nicot, Lengagne, Ksas and Lourdais, published in 2024. Physiological costs of warning: defensive hissing increases metabolic rate and evaporative water loss in a venomous snake, published in Physiology and Behavior. So we're talking about the nose-horned viper.
Yes, an adorable viper, a true viper, if I'm not mistaken, right?
You're quite right, true viper.
No heat-sensing pits.
That's it.
All nose.
It is not a pit viper, as you say. It's a true viper, so subfamily Viperinae, and yeah, it's just frankly a badass little European viper that we're talking about, really. So yeah, Vipera amidites, the long-nosed viper. Other names include the horned viper, the nose-horned viper, and some people call it the sand viper, apparently. But obviously a lot of these names to do with that little horn on the nose. And this is a species of viper which is found in southern Europe, mainly northern Italy, in the Balkans and parts of Asia Minor. So this is, it looks a little bit like our native viper, Vipera, the adder that we have here in the UK. I would argue these guys are a little bit more jazzy, possibly, mainly because of the nose horn on the face, which gives them kind of a slightly mean, cool look. But
it gives them a little bit more attitude. Yeah.
But yeah, they tend to be grey or brown, and then they have this dark vertebral zigzag all down the back, which makes them look very striking. It probably works as camouflage if they're in kind of grassland or sort of bracken. Yeah, it works really well in bracken.
Yeah.
If you've ever looked for small zigzag vipers in bracken, you'll know that the way the leaves of a bracken, like that sort of like fern looks very much like the zigzag. It's like uneven on both sides. The leaf, if you're looking for adders, you constantly see in bracken and driving yourself crazy. And yeah,
that's exactly their plan.
This is the plan, yeah. And this
drive predators insane with the search, and they'll eventually give up, and you'll be left perfectly peacefully and unperturbed in your brackeny home.
Ideal. And this is a venomous snake. Obviously, it's a viper. The most frequently recorded effects of envenomation by these nose-horned vipers or long-nosed vipers on humans are local tissue damage, local and systemic hemorrhage. So you get bleeding, both locally to the bite and also within your body, and also to a smaller extent neurotoxicity, so some damage to the nervous system if you get bitten by one of these snakes. And these effects may lead to permanent consequences for people, such as organ function loss, and in severe cases there may even be lethal outcomes of being envenomated by one of these snakes, so definitely well worth watching out for. The frequency, though, of envenomation by this species in Europe is less than that of envenomation caused by other species, especially in tropical countries. But, these cases still represent a concern for public health, mainly in the Balkan countries, so that's like Southeast Europe. Thankfully, though, Ben, these snakes are kind enough to give people a warning prior to them biting you, at least some of the time. And that warning...
And that's most animals, really.
Yes, it is. It is, and it's most snakes, certainly. Snakes don't want to bite you. They're willing to sort of give you a warning. But these ones have one, which is probably quite familiar to people who know their snakes. This is the sound of it. That little... Let's have it once more. That little... So yeah, that is a nose-horned viper. It is hissing. And this whole paper,
not the sort of showiest, most obvious warning, I think.
no.
Certainly amongst snakes and even reptiles, I feel like there are some that give less ambiguous warnings.
Yeah, I mean, you compare it to something like a rattlesnake, it's much less of a hiss. And, you know, the hiss of something like, let's say, a king cobra, way more impressive, more of a growl, quite intimidating. But this one, you know, it's a little wake me up if you're a predator, or perhaps not even a predator, perhaps like a large mammal that's just blundering around the countryside, and you're close to a snake, and the snake is venomous and it doesn't want to get trodden on, so it'll let out that little hiss. And the whole point of this paper really was to try and understand hissing in this species. Are there differences between males and females, and how and when they hiss? And also, does hissing have any kind of cost for the snake itself? Is it free to hiss, or is hissing something which the snakes have to pay for metabolically or physically?
Yeah, it's all about trade-offs. Exactly.
Yes. And so they, in order to kind of determine what the costs of hissing in these snakes is, and to determine whether or not they would hiss, they set up a bit of an experiment, didn't they? And they put the snakes in a little box, and then they had this sort of, I guess, protocol where they would give the snake a little tickle with a paintbrush, and then after they'd tickled the snake with the paintbrush, a fake bird would fly overhead. A model bird would be introduced above the arena.
Right, so
around.
it's trying to prompt this anti-predator response of hissing in a way that isn't overly harmful to the snake. Just stress them out a little bit, just enough to see if a hiss happens, really.
Yeah.
And then record what that hiss is like.
Yeah, they didn't want to send the snake.
It's all wired up, all mic'd up, these little arenas.
Yes, they were all mic'd up, and in addition to being mic'd up, they were also put inside subsequently they were put inside a respirometer. Is that what they're called? You know,
a respirometer, is that the term? Is it?
I think so. That sort of rings a bell. But basically, it's a place where the oxygen consumption of the animal can be measured, and the CO2 output of the animal can be measured. So you're looking to see whether or not the snake is consuming more oxygen, which would be, you know, a baseline higher energy consumption. It's like breathing more, using more oxygen. Usually this indicates that an animal is like more stressed or something. And they wanted to see whether hissing, or the act of hissing, brought about increased energy usage in these snakes. And so we mentioned there might be some differences between males and females in these nosehorn vipers when they hiss. And it turned out that males were actually more likely to engage in a sound warning when they were stimulated. So the males are more likely to hiss in response to the tickling of the paintbrush and the fake bird.
It was sort of tying this all in with males potentially being the more at risk from predation, as they tend to move more. They have to deal with a sort of mate searching business. They are a species that will engage in male-male combat, I believe.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of higher activity life history for the males of this species that might sort of expose them to threats more readily. And so having a heightened sort of propensity for hissing, and a more intense hiss, right? More as in louder?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Might have sort of benefits because they're more likely to be in situations that hissing might be more beneficial to them.
Yes.
Right.
And so they're talking about males being more likely to hiss, and like you say, males the more active of the two sexes, moving around a lot more.
Right.
In vipers, generally, the pattern tends to be that males are kind of moving around more, particularly in the breeding season, like you alluded to, looking for mates, whereas the females are a little bit more sedentary in their ways. They tend to have like slightly different body structures as well, with the females being like a bit thicker and a bit sort of, bigger generally, although I don't know about this species. I think the females are bigger. But yeah, you're right, though, that the males do practice male-male combat. And I mean, I guess it kind of...
which would be... if they do male-male combat, then that would be unusual for the females to be larger, wouldn't it?
It would be, yeah. But adders are like that.
The other way around.
Adders are like that too. Adders have the males smaller, but yeah, have male-male combat. Because usually if there's male-male combat, there's like pressure for the males to get bigger.
Right.
We should probably double check that though. What is the dimorphism of Vipera amidites? Males have longer tails and larger body size. Okay. But there you go.
Okay.
So the males are bigger.
Larger is in heavier or larger is in longer?
Larger. Confusing word, isn't it?
And, well, yeah. When it comes to snakes, it does tend to be.
Yeah. Body size and condition, effects of sex and populations. There's a paper here. And... yeah, I don't know. It's not immediately clear from this. Actually, I was hoping it'd be an easy find, but yeah, it does seem, yeah, larger. It just says males have a larger body size, so I'm assuming that means they're longer. I don't know though.
We'll take that for whatever it means.
Exactly. Yeah.
Come back to this on a later date.
Yeah. But yeah, so. One thing I didn't realize actually about this one, Ben, was that the snakes themselves are actually hissing both when they're breathing in and when they're breathing out. I always just assumed it was a breathing out thing.
Yes, I would have too. And I think that's a reasonably fair assumption to make because, I mean, it's interesting with this paper. It's showing that the inhalation sound is significantly less loud than the exhalation by like sort of 5-6 decibels. So I suppose in that sense, you might only really sort of clock on to a snake is hissing at the exhalation stage and maybe miss that inhalation.
Yep. And yeah, just to kind of go back to what they found. So obviously, when the snakes themselves are actually hissing, they use more energy. And so that makes sense because, you know, if you're kind of doing this big inflation and then exhaling, it's quite a dramatic thing. The muscles are moving. It's a lot of energy cost to like create this sound. But one thing I thought might be something to consider with this is that like they noticed that the ones that were hissing a lot more both used more energy and lost more water because they're like presumably breathing out the water. But one thing I was curious about is...
yeah, I mean, it's water vapor being expelled as part of the exhalation process, right?
Yeah, but one thing I was curious about is like if you've got this situation where the snake is using more energy, so presumably it's got like, you'd think it would have like higher heart rate, more oxygen consumption, and that is, they're saying that's because of the hissing itself. But I was wondering if there was like a threshold of fear, right? So like the snake's afraid anyway, its heart rate goes up, it's breathing more heavily. That threshold of fear is like reached, then it starts hissing. So maybe the energy consumption comes partly...
oh, I see what you're getting
It's
at.
like a feedback system. So it comes partially prior to the hissing.
So you're getting the heightened sort of respiration as a response to the stress as opposed to as a result of the hissing.
That's what I wondered. I reckon it could just be a bit of both, a bit of feedback.
I think a little bit of the feedback's accounted for because they're sort of saying that the water loss is increasing relative to the oxygen use. And that the hissing duration is also connected to the oxygen use. So there is that sort of quite tight connection between the hiss itself and the oxygen loss.
Right on.
Or oxygen use, which makes it feel like it is sort of a hissing cost as opposed to just the overall sort of being stressed aspect. Yeah, that makes sense. I wasn't really arguing with the paper. I just thought it was worth sort of mentioning that there probably is because you know they're comparing snakes which are just left alone and snakes which are tickled with a paintbrush and scared with a bird. There's probably going to be some increase in their like respiration just based on that without the hissing anyway, right? Yes.
But you're right, yeah, they do tie it in quite tightly. But it does seem to
take an extra step up with the hissing. I'm sure some of it is just internal, but those interactions basically make it. Yeah.
So
an additional cost, I suppose, is a way of thinking about it.
So we've got the nosehorn viper hissing here. One more hiss for the road. And One interesting thing that they also said was, the female's less willing to hiss than the males. We said that might be because the males are sort of this more active. They might be a bit more aggy because they have to encounter threats more often. One other thing they said was that females, because there's this water loss, evaporative water loss associated with the effort of hissing, they're breathing out all their water potentially, not all of it, but a lot of it. And some of it.
I mean, we've discussed sort of species that are more willing to lose water in the face of depredation events, with the lizards bleeding out of their eyes and things along those lines. But I think this one's reasonably limited.
It gets a bit brass-eyed, doesn't it? Have you seen that episode of Brass Eye where it's like, this poor lad cried all the water out of his body? Yeah, it's a funny series. But the females, they're less willing to hiss, and that means they lose less water through evaporative water loss, which, if you're a female snake, they have the responsibility of creating the offspring. Offspring are basically just bags of fluid, so it would also make sense maybe that females were less inclined to waste water by hissing if they've then got to think about making babies. That was just another point that they made in the paper, which I thought was kind of cool. So yeah, interesting paper, basically showing that hissing isn't free.
But just with that not free aspect, they've got a little bit at the end of the discussion about that water loss that I think is really intriguing, with regards to other vipers using alternative methods of warning.
Oh, yeah.
Where you've got potential desert species more likely to turn to things like scale rubbing or tail rattling, which potentially could be less energetically costly in an environment that, energy might be harder to come by, and that are likely not to have the same sort of associated water loss. Because, wiggling a tail, you're not opening your mouth and losing water through your mouth. Scale rubbing, same applies. So you've got your sort of Echis and Crotalis, more desert, arid area dwelling species that might have had to sort of adapt to potentially more water efficient warning signs.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's really cool, actually. Yeah, because they are sort of desert associated, aren't they? Those alternative warning systems.
Right. And I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what the sort of comparative sort of metabolic costs of rattling tails and scale rubbing are directly compared to the methods used here, to see if they are sort of more efficient on a metabolic rate, almost certainly more efficient on a water loss sort of rate.
Yeah.
Or at least I would imagine. I don't know how they couldn't be better in that regard.
Yeah. Oh, I just love vipers. Everything they do is so cool. Yeah, this is a species of snake as well, which I'd really, really like to see. Yeah, really beautiful creature. Definitely, if I'm ever in Italy, I'll be hunting in the racks. Okay, so let's move on to, shall we, from one species of venomous snake to another species of venomous snake, which we all know, which is being split up into multiple species here. So, we got an update here. King Cobra taxonomy, Ben, no less. King Cobras.
I mean, a lot of people have known this has been coming for a little while.
Yes, I must admit, I had a sneak peek.
The exact specifics,
yeah,
have been less known widely, but big split.
Yeah, and big crew of authors here. Many of which we know. Which is really cool to see. Shouts especially to Wolfgang, who's our supervisor, and Rhiannon, who is a Bangor student, who we also, or at least I know Rhiannon. Really cool to see her on another paper here. So yeah, King Cobras split into 4. So back in 2021, there was a kind of species delimitation analysis based on some genetic data, like a multi-locus genetic data set of mitochondrial and nuclear DNA, so robust, and also morphological stuff. And I think we covered that on the paper, didn't we? That on the podcast.
I don't think we covered it in any sort of massive detail. I think it was a sort of like any other business sort of thing, and we promised to come back to it when things had been formally described.
Yeah, so essentially back in 2021, there was this paper suggesting that there was sort of deep lineages within king cobras, particularly 4 geographically separate lineages, and they kind of suggested that these were confirmed candidate species, which is the kind of precursor of species being described. And if you go from west to east, there's this endemic Western Ghats lineage in the western half of India, then a widespread Asian mainland lineage, which is kind of from northern and eastern India to China and Thailand, and then a Malaysian lineage distributed in the Malay Peninsula and the Greater Sunda Islands, as well as part of the Philippines, so that's like Indonesia too and Borneo. And then there was this isolated lineage on Luzon Island in the Philippines, and these 4 groups have been described formally. 2 of them were already existing names, and 2 have been given names for the first time.
Fresh names.
Yeah, fresh, brand new names. So I think to sort of clarify for people what's going on here with king cobras, should we start off with the OG, the original king cobra, which is still called Ophiophagus hanna?
Before we do you want to give the full paper title and stuff?
I would love to. Okay, so this is Taxonomic Revision of the King Cobra, Ophiophagus hanna, Species Complex, with the description of 2 new species. And this is by Das, Gowri Shankar, Swamy, Williams, Lalremsanga, Prashanth, Sahoo, Vijayakumar, Höglund, Shankar, Dutta, Ganesh, and Wüster. So yeah, brand new, hot off the press. I mean, this literally just came out a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, it's garnered a lot of social media attention. Social media is popping off about this. And yeah, let's start off with Ophiophagus hanna. So Ophiophagus hanna was what they were all previously called. The classic, yeah. So if you want to know which one is now Ophiophagus hanna, this is the name for snakes, essentially from the kind of central northern part of the range in Thailand and eastern India and Myanmar.
Into China, Hong Kong.
Yeah.
All the way around the coast there.
Basically, as far south as Peninsular Malaysia. Once you get to Peninsular Malaysia...
Isthmus of Kra.
The Isthmus of Kra. That's when it...
the classic separation point between species.
Yeah, exactly. And when you get to the Isthmus of Kra...
Or thereabouts. They do mention in the paper that the exact sort of boundary there needs a bit more looking at.
Yes.
To really hammer it down. But it's going to be there or thereabouts.
But essentially, those are the sort of northern king cobras, and they've been renamed as such, the northern king cobra, which, nice simple name, easy to remember. And they're Ophiophagus hanna. And yeah, etymology...
This is great because it means all of the stuff I've been involved, we don't need to rename anything.
Yeah.
We don't need to suddenly start using a new name. It's same old.
All your papers are still right, which is great.
It's great.
It also minimises on the
Very
confusion. But yeah, so I mean, the Ophiophagus hanna, obviously Ophiophagus hanna, it's just the name hanna. But Cantor, who originally described this species back in 1836, didn't actually mention why he decided to call it Ophiophagus hanna. And actually, it was described as Hamadryas hanna and subsequently changed to Ophiophagus. But yeah, he never mentioned why he called it hanna. But recently, in 2016, an author called Adler argued that the name hanna was an eponym for Hannah Sarah Wallach, who was the eldest daughter of Cantor's host and uncle, who was a botanist called Nathaniel Wallach in Calcutta. So essentially, when Cantor described the species, he was working out of India, and he was hanging out with Nathaniel Wallach, and he had a daughter who he named the species after. Don't know what was going on there, but he decided to name it after her, and it's been like that ever since, Ophiophagus hanna. And if you see a picture of king cobra and you're wondering which species it is, it might be Ophiophagus hanna if it has light body bands present. This one has body bands present at all ages, usually with dark edges in most adults. And I think most of the pictures and images you see are this Ophiophagus hanna. It's
it makes sense. It's more
widely distributed and quite, you guys have done all the stuff in Thailand. There's quite a lot of study on them.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, I got the impression from the paper that the sort of colour variation and band variation, while there isn't 100% reliable, potentially.
Nah, there'll be variation.
Some overlap. I mean, I know that individuals change colour over the year and things like that. So the sort of how how much bands stand out and things like that are going to be pretty variable. So I think some sort of banding features seem to be better to go by than others, and I don't know, I can imagine there's a lot of variation in coloration still, just in Ophiophagus hanna, just given how widely they range and the sort of different climatic areas they're dealing with.
Yeah, it's not 100% clear, but the authors of the paper do try and sort of split them up a little bit based on pattern, because otherwise they are quite difficult to tell apart.
Yeah.
And mainly it's going to be a geographic thing,
Yeah.
Which king cobra are you seeing? Well, it depends where you are, realistically. So the second one, which already had a name, we'll move on to in the south, which is Ophiophagus bungarus. So this one borrows the species epithet bungarus from the genus of kraits, bungarus. And this one was actually first mentioned as Naya bungarus by Schlegel way back in 1837. So this is a name which is being resurrected from way back in the day. And that was a snake that was found in West Java, Indonesia. So essentially all the ones from Indonesia and Borneo, the Sunda Islands, are now going to be Ophiophagus bungarus. And the reason they called it bungarus, the reason that Schlegel originally called it bungarus probably is because either they eat snakes, like kraits, bungarus, so it makes sense, it's a snake eater.
It's sort of named snake eater in some regards.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because Ophiophagus is snake eater too.
Right?
The genus is snake eater. The species epithet is also bungarus, which relates to a snake eater. It could also be because their subcaudal scales, so underneath the tail, are partially undivided, like bungarus kraits, which is way less interesting. So we'll just say it's because they eat snakes. And these ones, the adults either are unpatterned or they have faint narrow bands, but as Ben said, not a lot of certainty in that, but there just tends to be less pattern on these ones. And those are the ones from the sort of southern part. Quite a big distribution on those too. And then so let's move on to the two newly described species. So the first one is Ophiophagus kalinga, and this one is coming out of the Western Ghats, so the western half of India. And this one, the name Kalinga, refers to Lord Shiva, who is one of the principal deities of Hinduism. In one branch of Hinduism called Shaivism, he's the supreme being. And just one of the major traditions within Hinduism, so named after a Hindu deity here, Ophiophagus kalinga. This one, has pale body bands, but, there's no certainty with that. But, just found in the sort of western part of India, so quite a relatively small range.
Yes, it's a very convenient one to ID, because, if you're in the Western Ghats, you know exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, in that sense, it's quite nice.
Yeah. And then the final one they've described here, brand new, is Ophiophagus salvatana. So this is the one from Luzon in the northern Philippines, and salvatana is a Tagalog word, which is a vernacular language spoken in Luzon and adjacent regions of the Philippines, and that's just their name for king cobra. So, salvatana.
King cobra.
Yeah, king cobra. The king cobra, which is pretty cool. And they've given that one the common name of the Luzon king cobra. The southern one is the Sunda king cobra. The western one is the Western Ghats king cobra. And the Luzon one is the Luzon king cobra. Then, of course, the northern king cobra at the top.
I get the impression that we're not super sure how far south the Luzon king cobra goes, though, right? Because I don't think they had any specimens from sort of southern Philippines sort of area. So it might, I don't know. We know that it's not on, what was it, Mindoro to the west.
Yeah, Mindoro.
Yes, so that's bungarus. But heading down to the south, I don't think they had any specimens in that sort of area to examine. So could be bungarus down there. Could be the Luzon king cobra. So
yeah,
maybe a little bit more widely spread, or could be entirely limited to Luzon, which wouldn't be overly surprising.
No, and like you say, there's a bit of a unclear boundary between the northern king cobras and the Sunda king cobras, and then similarly, like you're alluding to, the Sunda king cobra, as it goes east and becomes the Luzon king cobra, it's not exactly clear where that distinction exactly begins and ends on those eastern islands.
Right, but that's just a sampling thing, basically.
Yeah. And so there we go. Yeah. King cobras have now been split into 4 species. I have heard some rumblings that there might be a couple more species to be split from this group in the future. Don't know what's going to happen with that, but
well,
it's.
I think for the moment we can sort of treat it as we've got 4. We can stop treating them all like one big group for one thing. Suddenly it looks like Ophiophagus bungaris and what was it?
Salvatana
desperately needs some research, because comparatively the Western Ghats and Northern King cobras have been looked at ecologically far more intensely. So we've got a real sort of open question, and how we already know that they behave quite differently in terms of sort of reactions to humans and things along those lines. So who knows how sort of deep the behavioral differences go for the other 2 species.
Yeah.
They were classed as vulnerable king cobras, IUCN Red List. There's no way that stands anymore. Like part of the reasoning there is they're widely distributed. Well, you just slice that range into 4.
Yeah, particularly
you got an island endemic and a Western Ghats endemic, essentially. So
yeah, particularly the ones
that'll.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, particularly the Western Ghats one and the Luzon one, they've got relatively small ranges. So
yep.
Yeah, definitely.
And they're big animals. They're pretty high on the predator sort of ladder, so you assume sort of reasonably low densities. I'm not aware of a proper population estimate of king cobras done anywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what a healthy density of king cobras would be, and now we need 4 of them as opposed to 1, and sort of being very generous with the generalizations. So I don't know. It's sort of a bit of a call to look a bit more closely with these and see how they're actually doing, and see how each of them are actually doing, and see if there's actually any differences in sort of what they need.
Yep, absolutely. And Ben, just before we wrap up our discussion of king cobras, which has been very enjoyable, do you have a favorite king cobra species? And I think I know what you're going to say.
Well, I mean, my heart's going to be with Northern king cobra.
Yeah, it's got to be.
Like, how could I not?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I think I'm going to have to say the same, just because I've had the privilege of seeing him in the wild. I had a little taste of tracking them. They are magnificent. Although I gotta say, the Luzon king cobra, that one from the east in Luzon Island in the Philippines, pretty cool how lightly coloured it is, or seems to be, at least in the pictures in the paper.
We had lightly coloured ones in Thailand, dude.
Yeah, the one that
21.
The one that I found in the fish trap was
like blonde.
Yeah. He was really blonde. He's a beautiful snake. Yeah. So, yeah, you're right.
I did want to mention too. I was sort of slightly sort of harping on about the how difficult it might be to ID via bands. They do have a key in the paper to separate things off, so that is provided alongside to help determine what you're looking at.
Excellent, great stuff. All right, cool. Well, yeah, welcome to Science King Cobras, and again, congratulations to all the authors on a huge piece of work, which I know has been a long time coming, and superb, and great to see some friends on there too. So, Ben, any other business for this week?
Not for me.
No,
I
not me.
Spent my time reading about king cobras.
As did I, and it was time well spent. So I think, there's not really much else to say. If you want to get in touch with us, you can. herphighlights@gmail.com. If you want to follow us, you can. If you want awesome content such as king cobra maps made by Ben, you can follow us on Instagram at herp_highlights. We're also on TikTok. And you can follow me, Tom_E_major on Instagram. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.